So, this week, I was thinking about the most important keys I've ever had possession of. My mind went firstly to when I drove a car for the first time. I received my learner's permit. I was pretty quick on it. I got it pretty quickly after I turned 16 years of age. But getting my dad to let me drive was another story entirely. He was not interested at all in trusting me with the car. So it was more than a year after I had my learner's permit anyway, and I still hadn't driven. And we were going out to McDonald's. Now, McDonald's was a 10-minute drive away. I lived in Wangaratta, which you know is the 8th natural wonder of the world's largest above-ground hole. I've told you about that before. Wangaratta didn't have its own McDonald's at the time, so we had to drive to Glenrowan, to the one on the side of the freeway, to go to McDonald's. So I decided this was going to be my first drive. I took the keys because I knew where they were. I put up the L plates, and I sat in the car, and when Dad arrived, I said, "I'm driving today." That went down like a lead balloon, but I still drove. I think perhaps one of the most exciting set of keys that I've ever owned or ever had possession of is the keys to a house that we bought. This has happened a few times for us now because we've moved, in different places. But it's an exciting time because if you've ever bought a house, you would know that the process is quite long. You go through, you're looking, and then you eventually find the house, you make an offer, the offer's accepted, you sign the contract, and then you wait for what seems like an eternity for settlement to take place, which is normally somewhere between 42 and 90 days. So I remember particularly the house here in Seymour that we bought, which was a long story that many of you know about, that it was a 90-day settlement. So 90 days from signing the contract to when we could get access to the house, which also meant, for those of you who were here at the time, you would remember, 90 days from when I committed us to buying a house to when Pastor Fiona got to see it for the first time. It's true. I remember telling you as a church, said if you don't see me next week, you know that Pastor Fiona didn't like the house. Because it was in COVID, anyway. Some of you are like, I would never trust my spouse to buy a house without me looking at it. Pastor Fiona is obviously very trusting. But I remember getting the keys to the house, and for me it was like, finally we have a place in Seymour that we own, that we can come to. And we were able to then get tradespeople in. I remember sleeping on a fold-out bed in our bottom area, our converted garage on concrete. So the first thing we got in was the split system air conditioner in that room and heater, so that was working. But I remember getting those keys, it was so exciting. But perhaps the most important set of keys that I've ever owned were the keys to this building. I used to work at an insurance company. One of my roles was to do end-of-month processing. That required me to be the only person in the office late at night, at the end of every night, which means that I didn't only just have a key to our office, I had a key to this entire building, 303 Collins Street, Melbourne. I never thought I'd own a key to a 30-storey tower. So I could go any time I liked. I did sometimes, because we had a staff room that oversaw the bay. So sometimes I'm just going to go and sit in the staff room, because I can, because I've got the key. So important keys. Keys mean ownership. Keys mean access. Keys mean you have a right to enter. But keys also mean responsibility. When you've got a set of keys for a place, it means you're often the person who has to come first to open or stay last to close. It means you're the one that gets a call if there's an issue in the middle of the night that someone has to respond to. So when I was a pastor at Equip Church in Melbourne, I knew this. I knew keys equals responsibility, and it was responsibility I didn't want to have. So I went for 2 whole years without getting a set of keys for the church. So I asked my Facebook community about what are some important keys. A couple of people took a different lens. One person said, well, the keys of a computer can be pretty important because with those keys, you can type in a password that gets you access to all sorts of important or valuable or maybe even classified information. Kathy had a different perspective. She's not here to defend herself, but she suggests that she had the keys to Peter's heart, which he's not even listening to. But, but this morning, I want to talk to you about the most important keys that there are. Now, so if you've got your Bibles, turn to Matthew 16. We're starting a new series today. If we can go back a couple of slides to slide number 2. We're starting a series today which is running alongside of our month of prayer and fasting called Let's Get Spiritual. Try not to think of Olivia Newton-John, but obviously I was when I thought of that. And if we can go back, can we go back one slide? One more. I created a mascot for our series. So this is Spiritual Man. Me and ChatGPT did that a couple of days ago. So if anyone wants to create a better mascot, you're very welcome to. But otherwise, he's going to be our mascot for the next month. Spiritual guy. So anyway, Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 to 20 says this. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you, he asked. Who do you say I am? Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. I don't know if you've ever had this experience when you've been with someone and maybe you're in the presence of them, or maybe you're having a conversation with them and you don't realise who they are. There's someone really important, but you didn't realise. You would just happen to be there, and maybe someone afterwards like, do you know who that was? And you're like, nope, I had no idea. Has anyone been in that situation before? I remember this happened to me. I was on a flight to Canada once. I was going over to a friend's wedding, and I was at Los Angeles airport, and because I'm an Australian, when you're an Australian and you're sitting in a waiting room with a bunch of strangers, you talk to them. I've discovered through hosting exchange students, this doesn't happen in most other cultures. Most other cultures you keep to yourself, but Australians, we're a friendly bunch. We like to talk to strangers. And so I found myself in a conversation with a girl who was about my age, and pretty quickly discovered that she was from Albury. Now, Albury's pretty close to here. It's pretty close to Wangaratta, where I came from. So that continued the conversation, and yet both of us are sitting in the airport lounge at Los Angeles Airport about to fly to Canada. So I found out a bit about her. I found out she was now living near Edmonton, which is in Canada. I found out that she had some horses that she was looking after. I found out that she had just been in Melbourne. And then when I asked her why she'd been in Melbourne, she said that her boyfriend was the lead singer of a band, and that band was doing some performances in Melbourne. I thought, that's pretty cool. A band in Canada gets to be invited to Australia to do some shows. Wow, that's pretty amazing. And so then I said, I thought that was interesting. So, what band is your boyfriend the lead singer of? And she said, Nickelback. And clearly my response wasn't impressed enough for her, because I'd never heard of Nickelback at that point in time. And the conversation dwindled very quickly. But I kept it in mind. And so the next time I had opportunity to access the internet, I searched Nickelback. I discovered that they are in Australia performing at the Triple M Big Day Out. and that they had the number one song in Australia at the time. It's just a little bit embarrassing. In Matthew chapter 16, this is considered a significant passage because Peter has a revelation that this guy Jesus that he's been hanging around with is perhaps the most important person that the earth is ever going to see. He has a revelation that Jesus is the Messiah. He's the promised one. He's the Son of God. Now, this is not the first time that the disciples suspected that Jesus was this promised person to come. It's not the first time they discussed it. They knew he was more than a teacher. They knew he was more than a prophet. But this is the first time one of them actually declared it. And of course, for those of us who know anything about the disciples, Peter was the one who would make that declaration first. He was always the one taking the hit on for the others, saying what everyone else was thinking. Some of you have that spiritual gift as well. I'm not looking at anyone in particular. It's considered significant because this declaration was not just on observation. Jesus says to him, "You are blessed because God has revealed this to you. You haven't just observed that I'm the Messiah. God has told you in this moment that I am the Messiah." And so Jesus uses this opportunity to share some things with the disciples and Peter, because he articulates, you're ready for the next level now. You're ready for some new understanding. Firstly, Peter has his name changed from Simon, which means listener, to Peter, which means rock. And this name change symbolizes a new identity for Peter. Then Jesus states, "On this rock I will build my church." Now, when we combine this with the fact that Peter just had his name changed to rock, this can be a little bit confusing. For example, the Catholic Church believe that because of this, that Jesus is instituting Peter as the first pope and giving him transferable powers to then appoint the next pope and so on and so on. But the original language maybe paints a slightly different picture because we translate two Greek words into one English word, rock. But when Jesus says to Peter, "Your name shall be Peter," the word rock he uses means pebble. When he says, "On this rock I will build my church," the word rock he uses means big boulder. So Jesus is talking about two different things. He's saying, "Peter, your name I'm changing to pebble, but that pebble is part of this big rock, which is the church, that I will build, and the gates of hell will not come against it." I would suggest that the rock that Jesus is talking about, that he's building his church on, is not Peter. It's the revelation that Jesus was the Messiah. This was the inspiration of the conversation after all. It's from that revelation that Jesus says, "Okay, you're ready for your next level of training." And he says that all the powers of the enemy will not stand against this big rock, which is the church. I think about 2026 years later, or however long it would be, that we can attest that to be true. The strength of the church is based on the ongoing revelation that people have that Jesus is actually the Son of God. He was more than a teacher. He was more than a prophet, but he is the way to God. And to date, in the world today, something like 2.3 billion people have had that revelation and said that we will follow him because we believe that he is the Son of God. Jesus is central to everything that is in the church, which is exactly what whereas a mission statement, making Jesus central, is really the encapsulation of this passage. But I think also we see the evidence that Jesus is building his church and resisting the forces against it. Because despite every reason to the contrary, despite many empires that have risen, despite crusades, despite new religions, despite spiritual attacks, despite even its own excesses and errors and controversies, 2,000 years on, the church still lives. And I think if there's any evidence for the existence of God, it has to be that in 2,000 years, we haven't stuffed it up so badly that the church doesn't exist any longer. We've tried. We've messed it up majorly many, many times. But Jesus says, fundamentally, ultimately, I will build my church. I'm not relying on any man or any woman or any group or any generation. I will build my church. And the gates of hell and anything that comes will not stand against it. It will persevere. So then he continues in verse 19 by giving the disciples the most important keys in the world. He says, I give to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Does anyone else think that sounds like an important set of keys? Like, I know the keys to 303 Collins Street were pretty important. But I think the keys of the kingdom of heaven are just a little bit more important than the keys of 303 Collins Street. When you give someone keys, you are giving them more than just a physical set of keys. You're giving them trust. Think about this. You're giving them responsibility. You're giving them access. And you're giving them power. Now, Jesus is not actually giving us a set of keys. Like, there's no actual keys to the kingdom of heaven, just in case some of you think you're going to be Indiana Jones and go and find them. What he's doing is giving the disciples spiritual authority. And that access extends to us today. We also have that spiritual authority that Jesus was giving to his disciples that day. If I can paint this picture, he's giving us the keys to unlock heaven. He's giving us the keys to access its inventory of power. And the purpose of that is that we would bring God's kingdom to earth. What does it mean when God's kingdom comes to earth? It means that his will is happening on earth as it is in heaven. You might have heard that phrase before. In Matthew chapter 9 in the Lord's Prayer, isn't that part of what he asks us to pray? Your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. In Matthew 9, he says, pray that. In Matthew 16, he says, do that. He gives us the keys to bring God's kingdom to earth as it is in heaven. So then he continues to explain exactly what these keys do and the spiritual authority that he's giving to them. In verse 19, he says, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And I think this requires some explanation, because I think sometimes that our modern Pentecostal understanding of this is a little bit incorrect. I've been a Pentecostal Christian in Pentecostal churches for 50 of my 50 years. I've seen a lot in that time. A lot of good and a lot of interesting things. And I've been in lots of Pentecostal prayer meetings in that time. And I have lost count of how many times I've been in a prayer meeting where someone will pray, I bind you, Satan! And they always do it in that voice, because apparently that is what enacts the magic words. And I think that what our expectation is when we say that what God's going to do is tie Satan up, tie his hands behind his back, and make him impotent. But I don't believe that's correct. And there's two reasons for this. Firstly is we don't need to bind Satan for him to be bound. He's already bound. He's already limited. He has been right from when he was kicked out of heaven. Think all the way back to Job. When Satan wanted to afflict Job, he had to get past God first. He had to ask for permission. So God has already put boundaries around him outside of which he is not permitted to operate. But secondly, despite all of these prayer meetings that I've been in, despite all of the binding that's taken place, Satan still seems to have power. Satan still seems to come against us. He still seems to be active. He still comes to steal and to kill and to destroy. I think anyone who lives in Roughy or the surrounding areas would say that in our world today we still experience loss and death and destruction. Theologically, we would say that is all the work of the enemy. But I think God has a purpose in not making Satan impotent. He wants us to be so aware of the power that we have that whatever power Satan has is redundant. Let me express that a different way. God is not responding so that Satan would be compromised and have no power. God's response is to empower us so that Satan can throw everything he wants to at us and still lose. Understanding this passage, I think, comes from understanding what Jesus means by binding and loosing. These are two Greek words. The first, which we translate as bind, is dio. It means to deny or forbid or prohibit. The second, which we translate as loosing, is the Greek word leo. It means to allow or to permit or to open. And perhaps because I've just been travelling and I have this in mind, that the picture that I have is it's like we have spiritually the powers that have been invested in customs officials at passport control. When a person who works, has anyone ever been overseas before? And you arrive and you get off the plane. If you come from Australia, it means you've spent half a day on a flight. And then the first thing you do is you present yourself to someone at passport control. I don't know about you, I'm always petrified. Even if I've done nothing wrong, I've never done anything wrong that would mean that I shouldn't enter the country, but I'm always just, are they going to let me in, or is this going to be the end of my holiday right here? Because the government has invested in that person the authority to decide whether you can come through or whether you cannot come through. Whether your access is permitted or whether your access is prohibited. I don't know, and if you don't have the right visa, or if you somehow lost your passport, or your passport expires within 6 months, or you're trying to bring something in the country you shouldn't, then they might say, you're not allowed to come any further. Now, I don't know if you know this, but the most difficult country in the world to get into, if you're not a citizen, is Australia. And especially because we have the most rigid quarantine process you could ever imagine. Now, I landed in Uruguay last Wednesday, and I was through customs within 15 minutes of getting off the plane. No one asked me anything. They didn't ask why I was coming. They didn't ask where I was going. They didn't ask what I was doing. I landed. I put my passport on an electronic thing. The gates opened, and I was in Uruguay. In Australia, they've got an exhaustive list of questions that they ask you. You know, are you bringing any firearms? Are you bringing any illegal drugs? Are you bringing any seeds? Did you wash your shoes? Have you been in a farm? Have you got more than $10,000? You know, all sorts of questions they want to ask you before they let you in the country. If you've ever watched Border Security, you will see the sorts of things that people try to bring into Australia. It won't surprise you to know that I love watching Border Security, because any program where dumb people get their just desserts is a program I love. But our customs officials are trying to protect us from foreign pests and diseases. Although they still let the English cricket team in, but that's another matter entirely. This concept of allowing, permitting, or denying is well known to Jewish people. This was well known to the disciples when Jesus spoke to them, because this was a task that was performed by rabbis in determining Jewish law. The rabbi had the ability to declare whether something was permitted or forbidden, whether it was clean or unclean, whether it was allowed or disallowed. Now, for most things, the law of Moses was descriptive about what was allowable and disallowable, about what you could do, where you could go, what you could eat, what you couldn't do, what you couldn't eat. And I think we know even today of the Jewish community that certainly very Orthodox Jews are very specific about what they will do and won't do. You know, for example, what they'll do on the Sabbath, what they won't do on the Sabbath, because all of this is found in the law of Moses, which we love reading in Leviticus. But sometimes the circumstances are a bit peculiar. Sometimes something happens which isn't prescribed in Leviticus, and people don't know what to do. And so they would go to a rabbi to receive a declaration on whether what they were planning on doing or whether what they had done was permissible or not permissible. Let's say, for example, and I found this as an actual example, that your dog dies. Now, under the Levitical law, if something dead touches a person or a thing, then that person or thing is unclean and has to quarantine for a period of time. You know, we all remember that from a few years ago, right? If you were on the same tram as someone with COVID, that you had to quarantine for 7 days. It was pretty much like that. So if you have a pet dog and the dog dies in the house, then it makes the house unclean. The house has to be sterilised. It can't be used for a period of time. Anyone else who touched the house is also unclean. They have to be quarantined for a period of time. If the dog dies outside of the house, then it hasn't touched the house, and so the house is clean. The people in the house are clean. You just have to somehow get rid of the dead dog's body. But what happens if the dog dies on the doorstep of the house? This was a genuine question asked of a rabbi once. It's partly inside the house, it's partly outside the house. What should I do? Now, for those of you who are interested, I found this fascinating. The determination was, it depends which way his face was pointing. If his face was pointing towards the house, then the house is unclean. If the face was pointing away from the house, then the house is okay. But this is the process. If you're not sure, you would go to the rabbi and you'd ask the question, Rabbi, is my house clean or is my house unclean? And because I was in the house when the dog died, does that mean that I'm clean or unclean? Do I need to... And so the rabbi had this power of Dio and Leo. The rabbi would decide and make a determination as to whether what had happened was permissible or whether it was not permissible. Now, there's another step to this. Maybe something is so peculiar that the rabbi says, well, I don't know. I've never encountered this before. No one's ever had a dog die actually on, half in, half out of the house. And so what the rabbi would do in that situation, he says, I need to get a second opinion. And so he would get together with one or two other rabbis, making a group of 2 or 3. And he would put this situation to them and say, this has happened, I'm not really sure, what do you think? And under rabbinical law, if those 3 rabbis decided, we've examined this situation and we've decided if the nose of the dog was facing towards the house, then the house is unclean, then under rabbinical law, that became the law. That was now what was determined. So when Jesus says, when 2 or more of you agree on anything in my name, it shall be done, this is what he's referring to. He's not just saying if there's 3 Christian Hawthorn supporters that get together and say, you decide that Hawthorn's going to win the premiership this year, that's done. No. That's not what he's saying at all. He's saying, if 3 of you get together and you have examined what my will is and you have decided this is the will of God in this situation, then based on your agreement, that shall be done. Church, this is why we do prayer the way that we do. We say sometimes, and maybe you don't even understand why, to raise your hand and people will come around and unite their faith with yours and agree with you. Because when you're surrounded by 2 or 3 people, and we know that you're asking for God's will in a particular situation in your life, and we add agreement to that, then the Bible says that it shall be done. The prayer of 2 or 3 people is much more powerful than the prayer of 1 person. Jesus is saying this to his disciples, and in turn, he's saying this to us. I'm giving you the spiritual authority of Dio and Leo, of binding and loosing, of deciding what's permitted on earth and deciding what is not permitted on earth. If I can give you an example, just because I'm looking at Flick and she's here. We decided that as a church, that one thing that wasn't permitted on earth was for people to have their properties burned and to have no one supporting them. That's not in God's will. And so we said, that's not going to happen on our watch. So our Dio was, we're going to prohibit people taking this journey on their own. We are going to ensure that they have people alongside them to help them with their recovery. So how do we use these powers? Good question, I'm glad you asked. Leo is easy. Leo is permitting. When we find something that we believe is in line with God's will, we allow it. In fact, maybe we even authorize it. We say, God, would you bring strength into this situation? God, would you allow this to prosper? And perhaps we even practically support it. You know, I think any organisation or any person that's helping someone else is bringing God's will into a situation. Because while the devil comes to steal and kill and destroy, John 10:10, Jesus says, I've come that you might have life. And any time that someone's bringing life to someone else, I would say whether they're a Christian or not, they're doing the will of God. And we as Christians Leo that. We say yes. We authorize that. We give permission to that. We champion that. In fact, how can we help you with that? I think where our understanding needs to be developed is around Dio. How do we prohibit things? There's a story in Judges chapter 12, which I'm not going to read, but you can jot it down and read it later. It's very interesting. There's a conflict between Gilead, which was the area east of the Jordan, and Ephraim, which was a tribe, part of Israel that was adjacent to Gilead, but on the other side of the Jordan. Ephraim had threatened to enter Gilead and to harm the king. This king had just been appointed, just defeated the Ammonites. So, Gilead were pretty happy with him at the time. Ephraim said, we're going to come and we're going to burn your house down from around you, is what they said. And so what Gilead did is that they established a checkpoint on the fords of the Jordan. And when anyone came to the Jordan River to want to cross the Jordan to go into Gilead, they would ask them, are you an Ephraimite? Are you coming from Ephraim? Now, if you were trying to do something dodgy and someone asked you, are you one of these dodgy people, what would you say? No, I'm not an Ephraimite. if someone accused you of being a Collingwood supporter, it's like, no, I'm not a Collingwood supporter. Don't be silly. So that's what happened. So the Ephraim asked them, are you an Ephraim? No, I'm not an Ephraimite. So then they had a test. They said, can you say the word Shibboleth? Shibboleth. Can anyone say that? Perfect. Ephraimites couldn't say that because they couldn't pronounce the H. So instead of Shibboleth, they'd say Sibbotheth. And as soon as they were asked to pronounce Shibboleth and they said Sibbotheth, then the Gileads know, aha, you're an Ephraimite. And they would seize them and kill them. Over the course of this checkpoint, they seized and killed 42,000 Ephraimites. That's 42,000 attempted breaches. That's 42,000 times that hostility was denied. That's 42,000 times that their idols and their gods were denied. That's 42,000 times that the king was saved. As I conclude this morning's message, my question to you is this: who's manning your checkpoint? Who's manning your checkpoint to make sure that Ephraimites don't get in? No, I'm not talking specifically about Ephraimites, but who's manning your checkpoint to protect you from the powers of the enemy that would come to try and take authority over you? Are you using your spiritual keys to protect yourself from external forces? Or are you just not using your spiritual authority? What are you allowing into your life that should be denied? What are you giving admission to that should be shut out? The keys of the kingdom have been given to you to govern God's will. And the responsibility that comes with that is for us to preserve our lives for his will. Just like the rabbis would seek out the Torah, the Bible is that guidebook for us. When something comes into our world, something comes into our space, something seeking to come into our life, the very first place we should go is to look at the Bible and ask this question: does the Bible say I should let this in? Or does the Bible say that this shouldn't be permitted? Does the Bible say I should admit this? Or does the Bible say I should reject this? What are some things that are not in his will that we should reject? Sickness, unworthiness, fear, weariness, poverty, discouragement, futility. See, this is what I know. Satan knows more about me than I would like. He knows my Achilles heel. He knows my weak spot. He knows where the breach is. And he comes in the same point over and over and over again. He keeps trying to come in with the same negative thoughts that trip me up over and over and over again. And the reason he does is because often I'm not manning the checkpoint and I just let them in. See, this is the thing. Satan knows that he can't overpower us because he that is in us is greater than he that is in the world. But if I'm asleep and I'm not enacting the power that God has given me, then absolutely he can overpower me. So he knocks at the door with his lies. The battlefield always takes place in the mind. He knocks at the doors and says, fear's here. Can I come in? Weariness is here. Can I come in? Sickness is here. And can I come in? And if we're not alert to it, We just let it come in. We let it happen. So sure, welcome, old friend. We do. It sounds stupid, but we do. And I saw something in this story that I've never seen before. We have a perspective sometimes when we say, I bind you, Satan, that we think he's bound forever. There's an element for what he is. And in the future, he will be. The Bible says that there is a point that he will be bound and he will have no further power. But we're not in that time yet. And the thing is, he keeps on trying. He keeps on coming. Has anyone ever watched Coyote and Roadrunner? He's like Coyote. Didn't you ever watch that and think, why does Coyote just not give up? Satan's like that with us. This story in Judges 12 says he might try the same access 42,000 times. And 42,000 times I need to be there to say access denied. We have to keep resisting him. We have to keep denying him. We have to keep shutting the door on him. We have to remain strong. This is what spiritual warfare looks like. Because anything that you really want is worth fighting for. And anything that you really don't want is worth fighting against. Ephesians chapter 6, as we close, is a famous passage about the armour of God. It tells us about a whole bunch of things that we should put on. That's an entire another message. I'm not going to start that, don't worry. But in verse 13, it says, therefore put on the full armour of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you've done everything, stand. What do we do? What do we have to do? Stand. And then once we've finished standing, what do we have to do? Stand. And then once we've finished standing, what do we have to do? Stand. Stand. And when you stood, stand. And when you stood, stand. And I had this picture in my mind. We're not fighting with a sword. Certainly our sword is the word of God. But actually I think we've got a different weapon. Can we go to the last slide? We've got a stamp. Denied. I think we need to see this as our weapon. Sickness, I deny you access. Fear, I deny you access. Poverty, I deny you access. Discouragement, I deny you access. I'm not taking on the plans of the enemy for my life. I'm not figuring out a way to incorporate them and live in harmony together. You have no right to get through this checkpoint. You have no right to enter this kingdom. I deny your access. I want to do a couple of things just before we close. Is that video working? Did we get it working? Okay, good. So before we play that, one thing that we do in every service is give an opportunity for people to say yes to Jesus. Now, I've been talking today about the authority that we have when we're Christians. There was a point in time before this story where the disciples had to do something in order to be in this position where they could receive the authority of Jesus. And that was to follow him. Jesus, early in Matthew, goes to Peter and goes to Andrew and he says, come follow me. And they dropped everything they had and followed him. And that was the gateway to get to this part of the story where they receive spiritual authority. You might be here today. Many people here today are Christian. But you might be here today. It's like, I don't even understand what you're talking about. I've never given I've never even followed Jesus. I've never invited him to become a part of my life. I never knew that there was an enemy. I never understood all of this. And Jesus' call to you is, would you come and follow me? Just like he did to the disciples. Would you come and follow me? And we have the option to say no. But the right answer is yes. Could I have every eye closed just for a moment? If you're here today and you've never said yes to Jesus and you're feeling that tug on your heart saying, come follow me. If that's you today, with no one looking around, and you say, yes, today I choose to follow Jesus. Whether you're in this room or watching online, would you raise your hand and say, yeah, that's me. I want to say yes to Jesus today. I want to follow him. I want to give him my life. Father, let's pray for every person, maybe who's watching online, maybe not even live, maybe some moments after I preach this message. For every person who today would say, yes, I need to follow you. I pray they'd give over their hearts right now and allow you to come and be their leader and their forgiver. In Jesus' name. All this sounds like hard work, doesn't it? All this standing. It's like, Pastor Daniel, how do I do that? I even asked the same question as I was writing it, because, I have the same breaches that you do. They're probably just different. I know how hard it is to keep saying denied, 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 denied when the enemy keeps coming. That's tiring. And so God has given us a way to help us. It's called worship. I don't know about you. When I've been in a time of worship, I feel like I'm a superhero. I feel like I could overcome anything. God uses it to strengthen us, which is why precisely on Wednesday night, we're going to take a time of worship together. We'll start at 7, we'll finish not too late, I know, it's dark, but unfortunately some of us have jobs in the daylight hours. I would encourage you to come. It's going to be a time for us just to enjoy the presence of God. And the purpose of it in this month of prayer and fasting is to give you a toolkit for when I'm feeling overwhelmed and I'm feeling too weak to stand, what do I do? Bring myself into the presence of God and allow him to strengthen me. That's the thing. God is never telling us, you just do this without any help. He always is, I want to help you with this standing process.